salam, guys.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. I want to start out by, I guess, mentioning that when we spoke about this, we had a phone call a couple of weeks ago, and I said that I would, probably do like a disclaimer at the beginning to say that, today we're having a conversation that's like a very mature topic, and, just to kind of put it out there. And when I did that, both of you kind of shouted it. You pretty much told me off.
I would just say...
I wouldn't say shout, but
I felt like I was being attacked.
I'm really sorry if you felt this way. But what I felt like you are trying to cover up or trying to introduce a topic which is very crucial for Muslim societies and Muslim people.
Yeah.
In a way like covered. And this is what we are doing in sex. We are covering everything up so people don't know anything about it. So I felt like this is the time we need to open up, and we need to be able to speak about it frankly and say it by its name.
And I think, I don't know which, I'm going to pin it on you, but someone said that I was infantilizing the Muslim community by, so she's pointing to you, apparently you said this, I was infantilizing the Muslim community by even suggesting or thinking about framing it in that way.
Yeah, I did say that, and I do stick by that, as in I think this, similar to what Dr. Wafaa said, I think this is important conversation for people of all ages. Again, we're going to be respectful, it's going to be age appropriate, but I don't think this is only a conversation for people over age of 25, for example,
for
or people
everyone.
who are married, people who are unmarried, people who are married, people who are divorced, people who are looking to get married should listen to this conversation, understand what does Islam say about sex and intimacy, and and as Muslim, how can we understand about our religion and this important topic. So I think it's a subject that should be important and beneficial for everyone.
So to be honest, like after that call, which is a very interesting call in its entirety, but like after that specific moment, I did think about it quite a lot. And I think for me, at least, a lot of it is that the kind of reservations that I have about having this conversation is a lot of that kind of cultural baggage that we have within the Muslim community when it comes to talking about sex.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it was, I mean, I appreciate being told off. So I'm not having to go at you guys. I just thought it was interesting to mention that, because it really did get me kind of thinking.
So before you say, I just want to take my hat off to you, because even if you found this conversation difficult.
We haven't had it yet.
Well, the fact that you're willing to have it on your platform, so kudos to you. And also the fact that we're having a sister on board that's not really a woman, but is competent in this subject, because I think it's easy as men for us to talk about this subject. But again, I think it's important that we have a Muslim woman and is qualified that can speak about it, that Muslim women can resonate and listen to and understand from. So kudos to you for, again, not only inviting me, but inviting Dr. Wafaa to have this conversation.
Thank you. And I think as well, like, part of it when we were speaking initially, that you kind of get one shot at a conversation like this, and you want to do it right. You want people to be able to listen with an open mind and actually take on what's being said. And as you said, like if it was two men, for example, having the conversation, then sisters would feel like, oh, it's XYZ. Similarly, when you have two sisters discussing it, men feel kind of sidelined and alienated from it. So thank you both for kind of agreeing. I know you guys don't know each other from beforehand. So, but I guess what's also really good is that you both come from kind of very different disciplines and perspectives on this. So I think let's jump straight in. So the first thing for me was about I guess let's put it out there. Is there a problem with how sex is perceived or discussed within the Muslim community? And I guess, Dr. Wafaa, we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, there is a huge problem in the Muslim communities about how sex is addressed or sex is talked about. And we see this clearly in our work. Sex is never been talked about at all in Muslim communities. And even when it is talked about, it's talked about hidden, and nothing is clear.
And you mentioned as well that you kind of travel to the Middle East for conferences and have, are in those kind of spaces where these things are happening. Is there a difference between the and obviously our focus is the Muslim community, so like Muslim communities here and there with regards to attitudes towards sex and all of this stuff, or is it just mirrored regardless of where you are in the world?
I think the stuff is mirrored. A lot of it is mirrored, because you will find that most Arabic culture, they have more or less, they share the more or less like sex is a taboo, never ever talked about it. When you marry, you will know what you're going to do, and your husband will lead you. And that's frustrating for me when I hear that. And sex is dirty, sex is not good, sex is about it's about your husband. It's about how to serve the man. And I found this frustrating when I work with people because they're only there because they were told to do it. They are not engaged. They are not having any sexual pleasure. And this is something we need to talk about more.
And
during our...
it's something that we're going to touch on, but I think it's worth mentioning right now based on what you said. This notion of stripping out spirituality from sex. And I guess, Habeeb, that kind of lends nicely towards something that you mentioned in your book, which I've written down, and I'll quote it back to you in a bit. But there's something interesting actually in A Taste of Honey, where you talk about, and you mentioned just before while we were setting up, that it took you like 10 years to research and write. And it is, from what I have read, because as I said, it's a very dense book and there's a lot in there and you cover so much. But it's very interesting for me, at least, that there's so much kind of Islamic sources and references throughout, because how I look at things is that there's a huge almost disconnect between what I see in Muslim space and what we discuss even on platforms like ours, and the rich kind of history that we have. And you mentioned in the book there's kind of this decline of erotology, and I'm going to ask you first what erotology is. But you mentioned that the heyday was in the 9th to the 14th century, and then there was a kind of a decline. So firstly, what is erotology, and what do you attribute that decline to, and where have we gone wrong essentially?
Sure. So erotology is defined as the study of desire and sex. It comes from the Arabic literary genre called ilm al-bah, meaning literally translated as art of sex. And it is a science that a number of Muslim scholars, poets, writers, medical authors discussed and wrote many books about, dating back to as early as the 9th century, where they derived their sources from the Quran, Hadith, and even ancient erotologies from the Indian tradition, like the Kama Sutra is a book of Hindu erotology, and the ancient Greeks also spoke about sex and desire, again from their perspective. So like you mentioned, from a Muslim or Islamic perspective, we have a rich tradition of many Muslim scholars, both in the Sunni tradition and the Shi'i tradition, writing extensively about sex, desire, and sexual ethics, which is very important. And again, and the purpose of these books was not to only speak about the importance of mutual pleasure, obviously within the confines of marriage, but understanding the importance of female romantic fulfillment, because that's something that many people don't really speak about, especially nowadays. Whereas a lot of the early Muslim scholars, when they were speaking about erotology, the target audience was primarily men, and they were teaching men not only about female desire, but also how to get the best, how to ensure that your wife is satisfied in the bedroom. So they wrote a great length about it. And like you said, there were many books written between the 9th and 14th century, and then towards the 19th and 20th century, that's when it tapered off considerably. And there are a number of reasons for this, and probably I would say the biggest reason, the biggest factor was that a number of Muslims, because we was obviously colonized by the Western world during that period, we adopted a Western understanding about sex and intimacy. So even when Dr. Wafaa spoke previously, speaking about sex in many Muslim communities is considered to be dirty and things like that. This type of framing, this type of wording, that comes from the European or Christian understanding about sex being dirty and nasty, whereas from an Islamic perspective, sex is a way, or pleasurable sex is a way to not only pleasure your spouse, but also to earn divine rewards with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Exactly.
And that's something that I try to emphasize in my book, that even if you haven't read it, the central aim is that Islam is a sexually enlightened religion, and sensuality should not be devoid of spirituality, as in you can seek sensuality, you can seek sexual pleasure, obviously within the confines of marriage, and that shouldn't be, that's part of spirituality. So this idea that sex is separated from spirituality, that's from a Christian perspective or some other religions, whereas in Islam they're both intertwined. And that's something that I wanted to highlight and bring to people's consciousness, especially Muslims, that we don't know that we have got a rich erotic literature tradition, predominantly in Arabic, predominantly written by men, but they emphasize importance, like I said, of mutual sexual satisfaction within marriage, and obviously the importance of women's romantic fulfillment in the bedroom, and also understanding the differences between both male desire and female desire, and how you can get the best out of your relationship to have like a healthy and fulfilling relationship within the confines of marriage.
I do just want to say that I love that even in this we can blame the West for perverting, I guess, the attitudes and the way that we approach sex. As in, in most of our podcast episodes, we end up blaming the West for something. So I'm glad that even in this conversation about sex, we can do the same thing.
But we have to take some responsibility because I don't want to just blame the West.
Not absolving
that's a contributing factor, but at the same time, culture. So I mean, I'm originally from Nigeria, and even when we speak about Muslim communities, it's important we use a plural because in Nigeria, we're not homogenous. We're not a monolithic group, and there are many Muslims who teach about sex and intimacy. So this idea that sex is a taboo is not a taboo in some Muslim cultures, and that's what I kind of wanted to bring to light. And so something that we can share from different cultures, how they speak about sex and desire that we can.
So I was actually going to come to Dr. Wafaa, but I do want to ask you one further thing about this, because again, when we initially spoke, so obviously we spoke probably about 2 months ago about first having this conversation. I don't know how I framed it, but you seem quite taken aback by my phrasing of it. I think I try and, again, because of my cultural heritage background, whatever, I try and tiptoe around the subject, and it's difficult. And I think I said that I found some of your content shocking in terms of like it's very direct. And then your response to that was something along the lines, I'm very surprised to hear you say that, because in my community, in my culture, my background, we don't have this issue. There's that like celebration and that openness towards sexuality. So, and yeah, like you said, we have to acknowledge that we're not a monolith as a Muslim community. You know, on the table, we've got such vast different backgrounds here. The Muslim community is you know, huge. But with regards to the direction that we've gone, why do you think that we've kind of veered off in a different way? And also, you know, what's you know, you give talks and you speak about this, and I've seen you on Instagram lives and doing webinars and seminars and you know, everything else before COVID, obviously. But what's been your understanding of kind of modern conversations in Muslim communities? And I guess also, you know, it would be good to also appreciate it from like a cultural perspective, like the cultures that are more open, cultures that are more closed, and what direction we're kind of going in.
It's a brilliant question. I would say, if I were to sum it up, and it's looking at many cultures, both even Muslim and non-Muslim, we have a problem of male sexual entitlement, where the concept of sex and desire and intimacy, it's not really a problem amongst many Muslim circles, amongst Muslim men, but it's genuinely an issue if Muslim women want to speak about desire or speak about even within the confines of their marriage, they feel like they might be shamed. They might feel like they're not able to even conversate with their own husband. They might not even able to bring this topic to speak about in public or speak to the imam. And there's a lot of men who are uncomfortable to hear women's views or their opinions or some of their issues in regards to the issue of sex. But when it comes to Muslim men, if a Muslim man has an issue, go and marry another wife, divorce your wife. Exactly. Even if it's related to sex. So it's not that we have reservations speaking about this topic. We have reservations speaking about this topic when it pertains to women. That's what I've noticed. So the culture of male sexual entitlement is something which is, you could say it's a pandemic. It's across many cultures. And that's something that I think that's one of something I'm trying to do, is not only to speak and hear what different women, competent women, can speak about this issue, but also to educate men as well, because we need to be able to listen and understand from the woman's perspective. Because at the end of the day, if we are marrying women, we don't want to satisfy their needs, that was something that wasn't the understanding of a lot of the early Muslim scholars. And that's what I wanted to speak about, that it was part of your duty as a man, as a Muslim husband, not only to provide for your wife in terms of financially, but also to provide in the bedroom and romantically as well, and understanding her needs and not just thinking about penetrative intercourse. Sorry for being a bit, straight to the point, but that's something that we're obsessed with, rather than understanding there's different ways to pleasure a woman without always thinking about sexual penetration. So that's what I wanted to kind of bring to light, and again, have these conversations with different people who are competent, qualified, educated, that can educate not only women but also men as well, because I think we need to understand that sex, it should be a mutually pleasurable act for both parties and not something that's just about the man. So the culture of male sexual entitlement, I think that's something that we kind of need to address and give women the power where they feel entitled to sexual pleasure the way many Muslim men do feel entitled to pleasure.
That's absolutely right, because women don't feel they are entitled. And also, I agree with you, but I don't think men have to provide for women any sexual pleasure. I disagree with that, because women should seek their sexual pleasure. Therefore, they have to have the freedom to talk about their sexual needs. Man can provide, but from my experience, men provide what they know. They don't provide what the woman needs. And that's really frustrating. And the woman, as Habeeb said, they haven't got a voice. They haven't got the power to speak about their needs. They always feel like ashamed. They always feel like they shouldn't speak about it. Whatever they receive from the man, they accept it. It's all about pleasing the man. And that's not right. We should really help women to speak about their needs. So we have to teach them, we have to educate them how they get pleasure, how they really enjoy sex with a partner, how they say no if they don't like it, how they want to be connected during sex, because sex is not about physical contact. It's beyond that. It has emotions, it has feelings. Exactly as Habeeb said, it's spirituality, but big part of it is being yourself, looking at your own self, being connecting with other self. And that's a big thing. We don't do it. We don't talk about it. So I think there is a big thing. We need to concentrate on women more than men, because Habeeb said, and I see in my clinic, that men knows exactly everything. And when you start working with them, you find men, I do everything you say, but no response from the other one. And I hated when I seen a woman yesterday who said, my husband called me frigid, which is a very difficult term to say. She is not. She says he does what he wants, and that's it. Off he goes. And that's not right. Woman has to get what they need sexually.
I think what's really interesting is that on a kind of relationship level, before we get to the kind of sexual level, relationships, marriage is difficult. And communication, and you mentioned this, and you just also kind of alluded to it, that communication is key. And it's something that I think, when, and you see it in your own relationships as well, like when communication is strong, you can go through hard times, you can go through times when everything is good, but that communication is kind of what keeps that bond together. But I guess I wanted to ask you, and you've already kind of alluded to it, but in terms of the clinics and the couples that you've seen, I'm sure there are kind of recurring themes, because what I've seen at least is that when I get together with my friends and we do discuss our marriage, or like the grievances we have with our wives and whatever, like, oh, we don't get enough time to play PlayStation, the very trivial stuff, you find that everyone has the kind of same experience. And obviously that's very kind of trivial. So the assumption then, although we don't get to that level of talking about sex in depth, but the assumption then is that even on a sexual level, people have similar issues. But we just don't share or whatever else. So you're probably very well placed to be able to, I guess, share a little bit more about what exactly the recurring issues are, specifically, I guess, again, within the Muslim community, but what kind of things do you see as recurring issues?
Okay, before I go there, I just want to comment on what you have just said. It's about communication.
Okay, good. I didn't say anything wrong.
No, it's not wrong, but it's interesting that when you start working with people, they will say, oh, I have a good relationship, fantastic relationship with my husband. I have no issues at all. It's only when it comes to sex. And actually, when you start working with them, they have difficulty in communication in general. And if they have difficulty in communication in general, imagine how they can communicate sexually. Sexual communication is very difficult. No one...
Is that because there's like a heightened level of vulnerability at that point?
I think it's goes to many different factors. First of all, sex is taboo. You shouldn't talk about it. We were brought up in societies, Muslim societies, in Middle East particularly, and shouldn't talk about it. Okay? There is no sex education. There is no knowledge. There is no prior information about anything. So it's again, even she's gonna talk, she doesn't know what they are talking about. Okay? So the recurring theme I see is everything goes back to difficult communication or bad communication. Okay? Because they don't know how to speak, what language they use to speak about sex. All right? So most of the issues I see in my clinic is woman will come and in front of the husband, she will say, we are good, everything is fine. It's just I don't feel like I want sex, for example, or I feel pain when I have sex, or I can't have penetration. So they always refer to physical things. I don't have an orgasm, okay? I don't have desire to have sex. So all these kind of things which are vague, and when you talk about them, you see the way we were taught to work with sex education is to look at physical, physiological, And then psychological becomes like part of it. If you know how to do it, you do it. If don't, then you concentrate on medical part. And after, in the 90s, where this Viagra and things came out, it made it more medical. And even orgasm, it becomes like medical. Everything, it becomes medical. So when you talk about it, it goes back to upbringing. It goes back to the childhood. It goes back to traumas. It goes back to neglect. It goes back to sexual abuse. It goes back to the culture. Culture is a big part of it because we don't teach our children anything. I heard many women saying, I got married, mom didn't say anything to me. How did you learn? I heard from my friends, I read books, I go to pornography sites, they teach me. How you get all this information? So I think the common theme in Arabic, not Arabic, sorry, I mean in Asian or Arabic or Islamic societies is we are not acknowledging sex at all. And this is a big thing.
Jump in, Phil.
Yeah, sorry, can I interject? I loved it. I was just nodding so much. I loved everything what Dr. Wafaa was saying. I was just, from my experience, some of the common sexual problems that I've received, both from men and women. So from women, because I do receive, I mean, I don't practice like clinically, but I receive a number of messages and about like sexual problems. And the most common problem I receive from women, and this is both Muslim and non-Muslim women, is either the inability to orgasm during sex or a lack of desire. And one of the reasons I would say for these two issues is that people have got a misunderstanding about sex, because like Dr. Wafaa said, a lot of people have been, I would say, educated or miseducated from porn, as in they think that most women are going to climax via penetrative intercourse, when
Not
the
only
reality,
once, multiple.
yeah, when the reality, only 30% of women regularly experience an orgasm via penetrative sex. So there's a lot of pressure placed both on the man and the woman, that if the woman doesn't experience climax via intercourse, that something is wrong with her or she's broken, when in reality, that's not the most effective route for most women to experience a climax. So that's a big sexual problem that I hear a lot. Another one is the loss of desire. Now, there was a study that was published recently that found that 43% of women experienced loss of desire at some point or some stage in their life. And one of the reasons behind this is because a lot of people, both men and women, do not understand female desire. That female desire is not the same as male desire. Male desire generally is spontaneous, as in it's out of the blue. You can see something. It's one and it's linear. Whereas generally a lot of women's desire is circular, it's holistic, and it's responsive. And that's something that many people, even a lot of women, aren't even aware of, that they think that there's something wrong with them. They think that they've lacked desire, and especially in a marriage over a period of time, that their desire is not what it used to be. And then they think that they're somewhat inadequate. So that's why it's important that we educate and inform people about sex education properly, so they understand that no, in many cases, your low libido that you're worrying about isn't actually low in reality. It's just that there's a different way of actually rekindling and sustaining that desire that both the woman isn't aware of and the man themselves. So that's why it's important that, you know, we educate. And just for the benefit of the men, the common sexual problem I receive from men is basically how to last long in the bedroom, basic premature ejaculation. And again, because of porn, they think they should be lasting for an hour, 45 minutes, when in reality most men can only last about 5 minutes during penetrative intercourse. So it's having realistic expectations. But because a lot of people have been miseducated, like I said, from porn, or a lot of our friends exaggerate about sex, both men and women, so you've got this unrealistic expectations going into the bedroom that you're supposed to last X amount of time. And you know, so that's the problem. So that's why we need to have, you know, honest and open conversations where people can be informed about and realign their sexual education and sexual expectations.
So I was just about to say, the next point I wanted to get on was sexual education. But just before that, when we spoke previously, you mentioned some of like the more specific recurring things. So you mentioned, I think, vaginismus and porn or sex addiction as being two things that you've seen very commonly. Can you touch on and elaborate just a little bit more about those and any others that are there? Because I think communication, you mentioned, is another one that's like a general thing. But yeah.
I think vaginismus is a big issue in Muslim communities.
And what is vaginismus?
Vaginismus is an inability to have vaginal penetration. And it's very common, or pain when they have penetration. So it's very common. It's the woman is not able to insert the penis inside her, and it's really difficult. And when she can't, ends up with having severe pain. And the more she has pain, the more becomes fearful and she can't perform. So it becomes like no-go area there.
And is that a physical or a psychological issue?
That's a good question, because vaginismus could be physical, but it's, again, you can't say vaginismus is only physical. Vaginismus is a big thing. It's physical, it's psychological, and it's emotional, it's culture. You can say, you can put all this together, but the woman can have, like, insert anything inside her, but when it comes to her husband, she can't. And therefore, psychological part in working with vaginismus is very important. And for example, I talked to a woman today. She has been married for 6 years. And she tried everything possible. And this is really, she went to many doctors. She went to many physical therapists who they help with training the muscle, because we know vaginismus is just like involuntary contraction of the pelvic floor muscle. Therefore, when they contract, they close the vagina so nothing can go in. And the woman really was frustrated. She was broken completely. She said, I tried everything. And the problem is, exactly as Habeeb said, that the people who see us or see people from our communities, they don't understand the culture. They don't understand us in the way they should. So she's seen a lot of people here, but no one ever touched on her background. When we talk about vaginismus, we have to look years back. We look about childhood experiences, what happened when they were growing up, what kind of care they received, what attachment style they had with their parents, have they had any kind of emotional difficulties, what was the relationship between them and their parents, what happened in their life, and then again, what happened when this problem developed. It's something in life events cause this problem, and then what maintained the problem. So there is a lot we need to look at. And really, this woman mentioned a sentence which really affected me very badly, because she said, since I was young, my mom was talking about sexual intercourse. She talked about the pain. She said that it's very painful. When you give birth, it's very painful. So the woman, she said...
Psychologically, that will...
Exactly. Yeah. She said, I am sitting, crossing my legs, because I really worry about pain. Even she has no sex. It's just, she is closing her legs all the time. God knows what else. It was just like 10 minutes telephone consultation. And it's what message we give to our kids, what message to give to our girls about sex when they're growing up.
So you're saying that our experiences and our culture and how our parents talk to us, or how it's even not talked about, for example, can create and breed these kind of long-lasting psychological and even physiological issues. Yeah,
definitely. There is no information, as we said, no sex education, no even open conversation for the child to experience, or the woman, the girl to experience herself. Yeah. Even, you see, part of physiological development is a child exploring their genitals. So the girl will touch her private part, the boy will touch his penis, and then they learn. And once the family sees that, they start shouting at the children and make them feel.
You mean from like a very young age?
From very young age.
So you're talking about when they develop the awareness of their genitals.
Part of this development, childhood development, is kids are exploring themselves. So it starts from there. So if you see your boy is touching his genital parts, then straight away you worry about what he's doing, and then you start shouting at them. And he does it again, you shout at them. So the child grows up with the idea that my body is something shameful. My body is a taboo. So I shouldn't be touching that. No one should touch that. And negative messages, a lot of negative messages we get as we grow up.
And on the side of sex or porn addiction, again, I think previously you mentioned that there are very high levels of pornography use in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
For me, the simple assumption is that that's because of sexual repression. and similar kind of messaging that you're kind of alluding to, that, you know, you don't do this until you're married, but then there's like that big vacuum period in the middle where people are going to use the internet, explore whatever else. So you mentioned that as like a recurring issue. If you want to just speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a recurring issue, but if you look at sex addiction has multiple roots into it. So if we put sex addiction in a circle, we have something like opportunity, exactly like you click on the computer, something came up, and then you click more to come, and then you become interested. But there are also childhood issues like traumas. Yeah, there is trauma, there is childhood issues when you were growing up in your house, where what kind of care you received, how did you attach with your parents, and there are many issues for sex addiction. And the people I work with in the Middle East, for example, or in Muslim communities, when I explore their upbringing or childhood, there are many issues there which made them look to something like that. It's not like when you do sex addiction or you become sexually addicted. It's at the time when you develop that, you felt like it gives you a short soothing or coping mechanism. So when you watch pornography, you enjoy it, dopamine clicks in your head, you feel happy, and you start touching yourself, blah, blah, blah. It gives you an instant pleasure, and it makes you feel relaxed. So if whatever kind of pain you have, it calms this pain. But the problem is it's a very short, instant kind of calming. So straight away after that, you feel like, that's wrong. Why I have done that? It's a shameful thing. And then you go back to the cycle and you search again. You want to feel better about your pain. So it's sex addiction. It has, for me, sex addiction is not like, I consider sex addiction is a big problem, but it has its own reasons. So the people, it's exactly like people resort to alcohol. Why they take alcohol or drugs or do certain behaviors? It's more or less the neuroscience is the same behind that. But
so again, obviously I have a very basic and simplistic understanding of this, but are all addictions then just a coping mechanism?
Not all, yeah. It's most of them are, but don't forget to say one reason of them is opportunity. So opportunity means probably are working and then something came up and you
but opportunity is because there's using pornography, then there's addiction, right? So as I understand it, obviously opportunity is what's that kind of gateway that gets you in there, but then the addiction side of things is because you create that neural pathway, I think you mentioned,
absolutely,
towards this as a soothing coping mechanism. That's interesting. And to be honest, like, you know, we were discussing just a few days ago that we probably might even look at having like a whole separate podcast.
I think we should,
and each one, especially from like a psychology perspective, understanding these problems, because, and in fact, this leads nicely onto the education point. So what I'd kind of written down here was just reflecting on my own sex ed as a young person, and it was in school year. I don't know. I was like 15 years old. I can't remember what year that is in the school system, and they just kind of give you very basic advice. They teach you about condoms and whatever else, and like that's about it. Until now, and that's the point, that like there's nothing really within and like at madrasa you get told masturbation's haram, and that's pretty much it. But even when it comes to, like you mentioned, people getting married. So often, like in our culture, at least, you have a best man who's usually married, who will then give you the advice and tell you what needs to be done and whatever. And obviously is no expert on the matter himself necessarily. But what have you guys seen in terms of sex ed in the Muslim space? And also, where should people be getting their sexual education from? I think we'll start with Habeeb, because you've been quiet for quite some time.
No, I've been listening attentively to what's it.
But yeah, so what have you seen of the kind of sex ed, and where should we be going with that? What do we need?
Big question, very difficult question. Again, it depends. I think, again, so obviously I was born in the UK, but obviously from a Nigerian household. So culturally, I was brought up in a Nigerian household, right? So the way I was taught about sex, it wasn't from my parents, it was from my older cousins or uncles who kind of have these conversations with me from a relatively young age. Some of it was quite informal, but they'll speak about sex, they'll speak about sexual ethics and how you're supposed to be in the bedroom, right? And how you're supposed to perform all the rest of it when you get married. So most of my sex education came from, like I said, my older cousins or uncles, or to be honest with you, from TV and films that I was watching, even from music, in terms of how you're supposed to behave in the bedroom. What I learned from my schooling system instead of sex ed, that was just the mechanics. That was just the biology. But in terms of sexual ethics and then most importantly, sexual pleasure and understanding consent, as in if she's not interested, don't go there. Although the word consent wasn't used growing up, it was understanding of if your wife is not interested, you don't even pursue it, right? That was taught by I would say by osmosis, by my surroundings, by what I saw on TV, what was kind of considered to be acceptable behaviors in the bedroom. And that's how I learned. And that's how I think a lot of people learn about sex. The problem is nowadays is that, maybe I'm giving away my age, internet wasn't so popular when I was growing up, whereas now it is. And that's the main resource for people to learn about sex. And it's not only internet, it's pornography. So that's one of the biggest problems. I think it's important. People will learn about, some people prefer a very formal setting, like in a classroom. Some people prefer going to workshops. Some people prefer to learn about sex by their parents. Some people, they're uncomfortable to have that conversation with their parent. They'll prefer to have it with an older person that they respect. I would say it's probably better not to be educated by your peer, because as peers we kind of exaggerate. We're not open. We don't show our vulnerabilities. So you want to be educated by someone who's like been there, done that. But again, someone's got more experience than you, whether it's like an older family member or someone in your community that you respect. It might be the local imam. There are different sources. There are different people that you can speak to. But we have to remember that some people, like I said, are not comfortable to have that conversation with their parent. They'll prefer to have it with an uncle. Others, it might be going to a workshop. Some people prefer going to an informal setting. But I think it's important, rather than complaining about the lack of sex education or lack of appropriate or sex education that includes sexual ethics and sexual pleasure, we create avenues for people to get correct sexual education.
Is the problem not that... So you mentioned your age. I don't know how old you are, but you mentioned
36.
giving away your... I wasn't asking.
A young looking 36. I know, because some people might be thinking I'm an old
30. But when I was growing up in school, it was... I remember getting Facebook in my early teens, but it wasn't like it is now. And even... So I've now, like, I've delivered a few kind of workshops at different local madrasas to parents, educating them on the dangers of social media. Obviously not framed as that, but just an exploration of social media and getting parents to understand what their kids are signing up for. So I know, for example, one dad said to me that, like, I let my kid have all the social media platforms, but it has to be on my phone. So I have access, I have all the logins, I can look at his communications. I trust him, so I won't, but he knows also that I'm watching, right? Which I think was a really interesting way. And then there was stuff around another parent, and I love some of his advice, which is why it stuck with me. Another parent was talking about, and maybe you'll be able to relate to this from a psychological perspective, but he said that he goes for drives with his kids, with his sons individually at night. So it's dark, and they're both looking forward, and he'll ask the tough questions. And he'll have those difficult conversations
in the dark,
because it's difficult to, or for example, another dad said
to look eye
to look eye to eye, especially when you don't have necessarily that bond, but they're trying to establish and create that connection. And then another one was talking about, like, he'll wash the car with his kids, and while they're washing the car because they're doing an activity, then you slip in those conversations. You're nodding. Is that it's a bad thing?
I think what sex education has to start from young age.
How young? As young as 2.
Okay,
so my daughter is 2. What does that look like for me?
So if your daughter, for example, touches herself, and then just let her do that, because by stopping her, and then she will do it again. It's at this age, and when they're growing up, they explore themselves. That's a natural process. They need to know what is this, and when they become 3, 4, 5, why boys are different from girls. So they start trying to explore. Even they explore together sometimes. So the idea is to let her, not to shame her when she does something like that. When she does it, understand she is trying to explore. She is not doing it because something else, unless it becomes recurrent. unless it becomes recurrent in front of people. And at this stage, you need to make sure that nothing is bothering her. So it's important to allow the children to explore themselves in the good way. If there is any opportunity or in any question, we need to answer that question according to the age of that child. And by doing that, slowly, gently, you give them information according to their age, knowledge, and let them know about parts. When they are in the path, you can tell them they probably touch part, this is named this is named this, something suitable for their age.
So you see, even on that point, this is something that we've been discussing in the office because a couple of us have kids all around actually similar age, 2-ish. And we're thinking about sex ed as one particular avenue and how, at least from an Islamic perspective, there isn't currently a framework for this in terms of what age do you tell your kids what. And my particular personal concern is that, like you were mentioning, how, you know, I started actually making this point and I got sidetracked talking about kids and parents and whatever, but social media has kind of just created this avenue where I think there's almost like this hypersexualization of everything.
The media as well.
The media generally, but I think the internet is just rampant. So even things like TikTok, you've got underage kids essentially dancing in very little clothes, and that's like that's considered appropriate, good content that goes viral. And young people and old people are consuming this stuff. And so I feel like we haven't kind of caught up at a time when, you know, when I was younger, yes, of course, sex is always a thing and it's discussed and whatever, but I feel like it was more balanced in terms of like, you weren't hearing from this side, but you weren't also hearing from the hypersexualized side. Now we've got all this noise. And as you said, we learn through osmosis. So you've got all this noise on one side where you're just taking this all in, but then we have no counter narrative.
Exactly.
So how do we create that?
We have to just create the spaces. I mean, there are people, but we need to amplify those people's voices, because there are people that are teaching sex ed online, and in age appropriate settings to women only, men only. So there are spaces, but what generally happens is that, and this is something I've noticed, if you frame yourself or position yourself as a Muslim that's speaking about sex, you're going to have a lot of backlash within the Muslim community. If you just happen to be a sex educator who's speaking about sex, then Muslims are more likely to listen to you. So in a way, it's kind of like you can't put your religion in the forefront.
But isn't sorry to cut you off. Isn't that because there's like this kind of shame element?
I think it's because people's misunderstanding about the religion.
Yeah.
No, and the reason why I'll say that, sorry to cut you off, is that if I were to say, for example, a lot of Muslims have heard about the Kama Sutra and they'll be more than happy to read it. And then when I say, you know, that's a religious textbook from a Hindu perspective, all of a sudden they wasn't aware of that. When I mentioned the 5 love languages, everyone speaks about that by Gary Chapman. When I say he was a Christian minister, it's come from a Christian perspective, do you not consider that a Christian textbook? People all of a sudden, they don't know what to say. Whereas when it's a Muslim, anything you speak about is like, this is a religious textbook and they feel uncomfortable to hear it from a religious person, so I'd rather go from secular sources.
But that's what I mean. That's the problem, right? That we've disassociated sex from Islam to such an extent.
Because in Islam, I think Salim, what we hear from clerics and imams, that some of them translate. I'm not going to say all Muslims, clerics are translating Islam in the right way. Okay, so it's again, as we all know, there are many hadiths out there which are not right, emphasizing that woman, for example, should listen to her husband. I'm pleased that Habeeb talked about he was taught, not if the woman says no, he respects that. Actually, in Islam, it's opposite teaching, because if you talk, if the woman wants if a man wants a woman, and she said no, then all malaika will be angry with her until she gets up in the morning. There is a hadith like that. Have you ever come?
I haven't come across
that. No,
that.
there is hadith like that. Whenever your husband asks you, you have to obey. And that's not right. So I don't know if you come across.
Yeah, I know the hadith. I think a lot of it is.
It's not a big hadith. It's not.
I know
it's a daif hadith.
It's a lot of it, I think it comes down to the interpretation of the hadith.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
And that's one of the things, and that's something which. So, for example, there's verses in the Quran which tell us that we're supposed to respect our parents. There's some parents that abuse that, And then some people will abuse that, but it's not the Quran that's at fault.
No,
that you
it's
are
not
supposed
the
to obey.
Quran.
It's the
No.
people that's abusing that, and they will manipulate that. Do you understand? So there are hadiths which speak about the importance of the wife fulfilling her husband's right in the bedroom, the same way there's importance of the man fulfilling the man's right. I mean, the wife's right in the bedroom. Now, the problem is that a lot of the clerics, imams, da'is, majority men, we're speaking again, what I spoke about, the male sexual enticement earlier, they will emphasize these hadiths, they'll emphasize the importance of the woman fulfilling the man's duties, and there's no balance, and
So
that's
you
the
men-
problem.
Again, sorry to cut you off, but you mentioned Suyuti. And I think there's like volumes and volumes of books that he's written about this, and it's something I had no clue about.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really interesting, because when I think about education, there's kind of two levels to it. So for me, thinking from like the Muslim Vibe perspective, I'm always thinking grassroots. Like the three of us can work together, create content, create like, a framework for at this age, this is what you should be saying to your kids. And in fact, it's something that we're actually trying to do. And I might
that
speak to you
would
guys
be great,
afterwards.
because it's all will start from childhood.
Yeah.
The more the child grows up, the more you feed them with, they ask questions. They ask sexual question, and we feel shy. Don't talk about this. Don't mention.
It's because we don't have an alternative narrative or an alternative
Therefore,
framework.
we have to learn as parents. We have to learn that if there is a question, it's a platform to answer in the right language for the right age at the time. And the more they grow up, say for example, you are watching a film, and then some erotic scenes or a kiss or whatever, straight away some parents will switch off the
You
TV.
get a shoe flying across the living
And
room.
what message you give to your child?
Yeah.
And actually, you encourage him to go and search behind your back, find more information. What's about that? And probably will get more interested. But if we take this any opportunity to teach them, to feed them with the right information about what sex is about, what sexual relationship is about, how women and a lot of children will ask, where did I come from? How did you get me? And then we say, oh, you came from the sky. Or God just gave you to us. It's all really idiotic answers. And actually, we should be clear. We should be clear according to the age.
And I think as well, just to add to that, I think like so similar with the platform that you've created and what you're doing, yes, you're educating people, you're empowering people, but you're also entertaining people. Correct me if I'm wrong, you're right? That's how you...
With the Muslim Vibe?
Yeah, with the Muslim Vibe,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And I think that's important because generally when people think, and I'm generalizing here, people think about Islam or sex education, it's like rule-based, halal, haram. And I think that's not the way we should look at. When you're speaking about any relationship, whether it's a interpersonal relationship, you've got a friend, you don't think about this is what I can and can't do. You've got friends that these are their things. That's why as Muslims, when we teach about Islam or these topics, understand the spirit of the law as opposed to declare rigid, this is what you can't do, this is what you can do. Because most people know like the boundaries in terms of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Now within the boundaries obviously of a marriage, there's many things that maybe is acceptable for one person in their marriage, it's not acceptable for another person based on their culture, their personality. And that's what we need to kind of speak about, because generally we just present one ideal and then people feel, okay, if they don't conform to this ideal, there's somewhat a bad Muslim or there's something wrong with them. And that's not the case. And that's why I just think we just need to expand how we're even framing and speaking about sex education. Because even when I think about sex education, to be honest, I just think of it's a dry subject. I'm just going to be hearing about biology. I'm just going to be hearing from Islamic perspective, halal, haram, that's it. Whereas people speaking about sexual ethics, consent, pleasurable sex or intimacy or relationships, you're speaking about many things that just doesn't pertain to like what Dr. Wafaa said previously about the actual acts. You're speaking about a lot of the acts or the attitudes that precede the actual act of sex as well. So I think that we just need to kind of be clever when we're marketing it as well.
But I guess the point is that we don't even get to that point because we don't talk about sex.
We do. We're talking about it now.
No, we're talking about it now. But
People
we
are
talk
speaking
about it now, but even husband
yeah.
and wives, they don't talk about
But
it.
people
And
are-
this is a
yeah.
frustration of it. And when you start working with them, I worked with many people who were like, how on earth you say that? How on earth you want me to call my parts or my wife's parts in certain way? I said, I'm not. Call them whatever you like. But there is always resistance about learning, about saying Islam give us all the liberty, give us all the freedom to enjoy each other.
Yeah.
But we don't use it. We have certain fixed, teaching about sex. So we have to change that. We have to change it.
So, I mean, when you say we don't speak about it, we do speak about, or at least read about, or some of us unfortunately watching it, but we are not speaking about it, or people are not speaking about it in their relationships.
Correct.
Exactly.
And that's a problem. So, so it's not, it's because again, if people have received correct, appropriate sex education, and they're having these open and honest conversations and being vulnerable with their partners in the bedroom, then it's not an issue. You don't need to have like these so many of these platforms, but because men are hearing it from one source, women are hearing it from one source, and a lot of that information that they're receiving this sex education is miseducation, and they're not even speaking between themselves. That's why there's this problem.
And I have to add to that, Habeeb, that every couple is unique. So whatever you do with your wife is not necessarily what I do with my husband. It's not Habeeb would do with his wife. Every couple is unique. They build up their sexual relationship according to their needs, emotions, feeling, connection, spiritual. I don't like this word.
Spirituality.
I can say it sometimes. All this included. Okay, so exactly as you said, it's vulnerability. How can you show your emotion, your feelings, yourself to the person in front of you? How can you be there without feeling judged, without feeling like misunderstood? Can be feel free and safe and protected. We don't do that. It's frustrating when you work with couples, and to get them to this stage, it takes a lot of effort. And again, they say, oh, but I was seeing a white girl who has initially vaginismus, now turned to be like pain during sex. And she was frustrated. She said, are you saying I'm the only one having this? I said, no. If you are the only one, I wouldn't be in this clinic because I'm seeing many people like you. She said, oh, are you saying there are people around me who have the same problem? I said, yes. And she felt, no, all my friends are okay. All my friends are fine. They don't have this problem. Actually, they enjoy what they do. Said, as Habeeb said earlier, if I'm not performing in my bedroom, I'm not going to come and talk to my friend and say, by the way, I have issues.
Everything's awful,
It's marvelous, it's great. And everyone, particularly men, they show they are great in bed, all right? But they don't tell you the truth. So they hear from their friends and they come and tell you, I'm the only one who have problem. There are many people out there have many problems, but some of them are able to come and seek help. Some of them, maybe they are at the verge of divorce. They have to do something about it. Maybe some of them were sent by their husbands to be sorted out. There are many, many things there. So many problems like that out there. And I think more in our communities.
So you said you don't like pronouncing the word spirituality. So
no, sometimes it's not I don't like. It's sometimes it doesn't.
I know, but I apologize.
But I love spirituality.
The last segment we're going to be talking about spirituality. So Habeeb, just a quote from your book. In the introduction, you say the central aim of the book is to argue that Islam is a sexually enlightened religion, which teaches that sensuality should not be devoid of spirituality. The book also argues that the loss of sacred sexuality afflicting modern society can be reclaimed by a revival of the classical erotological traditions. For people listening, yes, it's very dense. The whole book is very dense, and it's a very good.
No, you have to deconstruct.
Yeah, we have to deconstruct all this. But I thought, and this has been like, I mean, we're just coming up to like an hour now, and it's been a fascinating conversation. And I definitely think there needs to be more of this. Whether it's a separate podcast or if we do this again, like a part 2, and we pick on specific issues, because like we discussed before, I think this is very much a surface level conversation, but there is so much more depth that we kind of need to get into. So I wanted to pick up on this, and it's something that we've discussed in passing, and I've kind of overlooked it as you guys have mentioned it, but the spiritual side. And Dr. Wafaa, when we spoke last, I've got here, ask her before the podcast, but I forgot to. You mentioned a model that, have you got it there? Perfect. Okay, cool. So we'll get back to that in a second. So Habeeb, with regards to the book, you mentioned that you wanted this to kind of make the argument for Islam being linked to spirituality. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So what I wanted to demonstrate with the book, and that's why I quoted and referenced so many different scholars from different centuries speaking about this topic, was that the pursuit of pleasure or the pursuit of sensuality Obviously, as long as it's within the confines of marriage, it's a way to earn the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know that's something that we're all seeking. We're all seeking to enter paradise. We're all seeking to earn the pleasure of Allah. And people often disregard that. Yes, we speak about charity, we speak about fasting, but being good to your wife being good to her husband as well, obviously pleasuring your wife, pleasuring your husband, these are ways where you can earn divine rewards. And this is why a number of the scholars spoke about it at great length, because like Dr. Wafaa said, every couple is unique and different. And the idea of them speaking about erotology and the different ways to pleasure your wife or your husband was because they wanted to present different ways, that there's not just one way. And one thing which I really loved about the early Muslim scholars that spoke about this topic is that they were polymaths, as in there wasn't just someone that was an expert in Islamic law, jurisprudence. There wasn't someone that they looked into theology, they were looked into medicine, they looked into different, like it's a lot of the social sciences that we kind of revere today. And I think that's something that I think even with many of our, whether they're scholars or speakers, to take benefit into, you're not going to know everything, but you can learn some of the jewels from other social sciences and understand the psychology and these type of things. That this is something that again we can kind of learn from, and that's something which again, because one of the issues I think a lot of Muslims are troubled with is that we want the balance, like you mentioned earlier. We don't want to go to the one extreme of associating sex with just being about either procreation or it's painful, which Dr. Wafaa said, and we don't want to go to the other extreme, which we see in many secular societies, that hedonism. And it's just about the pursuit of pleasure at all costs without having the restraint that we have to understand. Our religion teaches us we have to have sexual restraint. We can't just follow your desires and have relations with anyone and everyone that you want, and even within the confines of your bedroom. Like, it doesn't mean just because she's your wife, because some cultures teach that you've got access to your wife anytime and every time, and Islamically that's not the case.
Exactly.
So that's why it's about having that balance, and that's something which when I'm speaking about reviving the classic erotology tradition is because they spoke about the jewels of sexual pleasure and intimacy, but also spoke about the rewards that potentially you can get from it from a spiritual perspective. And this is something that not only can obviously increase the love between the partners, but also ultimately, inshallah, you can earn divine rewards with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for me, like I said, sensuality is not devoid of spirituality. They're interlinked, but at the same time, it doesn't mean you just pursue one and you neglect the other. So that's why it's important that, even as Dr. Wafaa mentioned, a number of modern day sexologists and sex therapists, because they come from even atheist perspective or non-religious perspective, they don't understand the importance of spirituality or Islamic ethics or the ruling. So that's why when they're saying you can do X, Y, and Z, they're just thinking about the performative aspect of sex rather than understanding that there's certain things that we need to understand from Islam.
I don't know, but before Dr. Wafaa comes in, I see she's got the book open. So
because I like the model. We do it more or less, but I like the way this. Her name is Gina Ogden.
So I was going to say, just before I bring you in, I don't know if this will make sense when I say it, but hopefully you guys will understand. But I was just thinking as you were speaking that when it comes to sex in relationships, even within the confines of a halal relationship, I still feel like there's this attitude that it's a very animalistic, lowly type thing, unless it's for the purpose of procreation, which is like a godly act. That sex is seen as like it's very base, and it's like fulfilling your base desire, just like eating in a way. Like, gluttony and lust are two of the 7 deadly sins, I believe, right? And I think it's seen in that way, and that it can be perceived as like an overindulgence. I know this is wrong, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, I think that's the kind of attitude that some people have towards it. So that's why, as I said, when you talk about spirituality, it kind of, it changes the game a little bit. And when you think about it in the context, even within the book, when I was reading this stuff, I'm like, yeah, this is all in our tradition. It's good, it's encouraged, it's positive, but there isn't that appreciation because of, I guess, the erosion or even erasure from our traditions of these kind of sacred texts and writings. You were going to interrupt me. What were you going to say?
I was going to. I'm sorry. It's just because
I'm just curious.
It's when you use the word like the 7
deadly sins.
Yeah. What religious tradition is that?
That's Christianity.
We're not Christians.
I know.
But I'm just saying. There's a lot of when we think about lust, we from the Christian. So lust, as in
this is that Western influence.
It's a Western influence.
So
again, to have shahwa, it's not bad in and of itself. If it's within the confines of marriage, it's perfect. It's not only good, it's laudable. It's a virtue. Whereas obviously if it's exercised outside of marriage, that's when it's...
again,
When
like,
so that's why we have to even question ourselves and when we use it. Because when we think about lust, because people say lust is bad, but like love is good, because from a Christian perspective, that they believe that in heaven there's no such thing as sexual relations. But from an Islamic perspective, we will enjoy sexual relations in paradise. So we've got a different framework of an understanding about what is sex. So even when we think about sex from an Arabic perspective, and nikah, we generally think of, if you say nikah, people think of marriage. The linguistic meaning originally, nikah means sexual intercourse.
Yeah.
So the purpose of getting married is to have sex, pleasurable sex, and I would say not for procreation purposes. Because this idea of sex being purely for procreation, again, that's from Catholicism and Christianity, which we've adopted and consider that, again, the purpose of sex is to have children. And again, so that's why it's always about questioning, okay, this understanding that you've got, this Muslim understanding, is it your Muslim culture understanding or is it an Islamic understanding that comes from the sources? That's why it's just to kind of
So this is what I said, like this is the start of so many conversations, I think. But anyway, Dr. Faso,
But,
I don't know what you're about to say.
I want to say, probably I'm going to summarize what Habeeb said. Is sex is not only about performance. It's not about physical thing.
Yeah.
It has, this model really is very nice. It talks about mental status during sex. It talks about physical, which like how your body, sensations and everything, and the emotional and spiritual side of it. And I liked what the woman said
What's
here.
the name of the book?
It's called Expanding the Practice of Sex Therapy.
By Gina Ogden.
Yeah. And she talks about spirituality in a very nice, like what Habeeb explained. Is she said spirituality means a sense of direct personal connection with the divine, as distinct from a mediated connection of divine through organized religion with its culture and tradition of rules. So as Muslim, we have certain tradition about Islam. We have culture about sex, and we have culture about sex. But actually what she's saying is sex is another connection with God. Whatever God is, for us Allah, for other people could be anything. And she talked here also about it leads to increased energy, heightened meaning, and a sense of enduring satisfaction, which it's really important to feel like it gives you a sense of connection with self, sense of connection with your partner, sense of connection with pleasure, with everything. But people put religion and sex in separate contexts, and they don't mix.
Yeah, and have you noticed that it's very common for people nowadays? People are uncomfortable with religion, but they prefer spirituality. I'm spiritual. I'm not religious. So that's something that you notice that people. Because religion, unfortunately, has a stigma even amongst Muslims.
Yeah,
that they want to be considered to be religious, because many people think of religious people being harsh and, just giving instructions. Whereas if you're spiritual, you're someone that has a connection. You're someone that's, and that's something that again we need to reframe, because there's nothing wrong with being religious, but it's people's misunderstanding of religion. The same way now with non-Muslims, no one wants to mention God or Allah, but they want to say the universe. They want to say energy, because they're speaking about the same thing. But again, it's just like maybe as Muslims, we haven't marketed the religion as well as probably we should have, or we could. To be honest, that's what it is, because we all want the same thing, but it's just people. Again, I think if they hear certain words, I think because of their social conditioning, they'll just shut down, or they feel like this is not for me. And I just think even part of like the work that you're doing, we just need to kind of be a bit more cute in how we're kind of presenting this information, because ultimately what that book is saying is not too dissimilar to what earlier the Muslim scholars wrote. It's not too dissimilar to what the Kama Sutra wrote, but that's coming from a Hindu perspective. This has come from a different perspective.
But again, like one of the big takeaways from me from today is that people are a lot more willing and comfortable with going outside of Muslim spaces to hear this stuff. So you're more willing to listen to, as you say, like consulting the Kama Sutra, for example, but then not actually looking at what our religion says about it. And I think, because I come at it from a layperson perspective, I think
you're not as late as you think you are. I've heard you say this in a number of podcasts. I'm not that. You know what you're talking about. I'm sat
opposite from like someone who's written a book that took 10 years and a doctor. Like I don't have a voice on this, but I know how people think. I see society, and I still think that there's this big disconnection between Islam and sex and sexuality, and I think that's something that we need to bridge and we need to address. And I guess, to conclude from my side, I commend you both on the work that you do, with couples and relationships and whatever else, and also the kind of education that you give to the wider community about this stuff. And I'm sure we'll put your details below, both of you. I'm sure you'll be inundated with people getting in touch and whatever else. But thank you both. Like as I said, there's so much more to do on this, and we'll definitely have conversations after this podcast about how we can progress this and do more on this. But I think as like an introductory conversation into this topic, it's been really enlightening and important, and we've covered quite a lot, although we haven't gone into a lot of depth. I think it will serve for a lot of food for thought for people. And I think especially, at least when I think about this stuff, as I mentioned, like, my daughter is 2, and we spoke about sex education. I think that for me is one of the biggest aspects. And especially people who are listening who are contemplating having kids, have kids already, or even their kids are like their teens or whatever, being able to assess and understand often, I guess, the mistakes or the ways that our parents did an injustice to the topic for whatever reason. And I think we should, we have to and can excuse them for various faults in their kind of in that arena. But I think it's really important that for the next generation, we do a lot better by them in terms of how we discuss these topics. I guess the final thing is that if either of you have anything else you want to add.
I think when you do the workshop for social media or whatever, what do you do for parents?
Yeah, talk about social media.
Tell them not to take children in the dark and talk about it. Because this is a very bad association.
Really?
Yeah, because...
but as a starting step.
So, they will get many opportunities with their kids without waiting for that to happen. So the kid will ask questions, the kid will do something, will read something, will come across something. They have to be able to take the opportunity.
So for full context, just to because I think that guy did well, because I think he had like 3 sons or something, and what he was saying is that to initiate that conversation, that's what he did. But then slowly the kids became more able to talk to them, and then one of his sons later on came up to him after breakfast and on a Saturday and asked him a very direct question.
Good.
But I think, and again, this might be like our own culture, but I know in my community, the perception of the kind of dynamic between the father and son is that very, like, the father is very stoic, very, the usual stereotype. And so now you've got that kind of middle generation, so like in their 40s, that have been brought up with that and are trying to change now because they're seeing their kids becoming men, teenagers, and they're like, crap, I don't know how to relate to this guy. I don't know how, like, I want to teach him, but all I've done is like the toxic parenting that I received. And now how do I establish a connection? So it was interesting because they were asking me, how do I start conversations with my kids? And I'm like, I don't know, guys. Like my daughter's 2, but she barely talks. She talks a lot actually nowadays, but it's not coherent. But so then what I said to them, I was like, you guys tell each other. I don't know the answers. So, what do you guys do? And it was interesting because you heard people coming up with stuff and other guys were like, oh, that's a really good idea. I'm going to try and do that. Because we're talking about we're having a conversation about sex here, but when we speak about communication at all levels of relationships, I think communication is the cornerstone, right? And
it is essential. It's not easy.
And it's not easy. So on the note of communication, let's definitely do more of this. I think we've started and opened the door to a conversation that does need to continue. Let's see where it goes. Thank you both for your time today.
Thank you, Salim. Thank you. And thank you for having me. And I really have the pleasure to be with Habeeb today.
It's pleasure to be joined by you as well.
Really
you guys can have your own podcast. But no, thank you guys.
Thank you.